Hi everybody. As you can see, we're back with Colouring Heaven again today, and that's because today's video is based kind of somewhat loosely, I think, on the Friends of Colouring Heaven Facebook group challenge for this month, because in the Facebook group they do have a different challenge every month. And the one for this month, because it's May and Mermaid, where everyone colours mermaids, is kind of a tradition in the colouring community. They've based their challenge around mermaids, and the challenge is to colour a picture of a mermaid from any Colouring Heaven magazine and to add some red into it as a kind of nod to Ariel from Disney's Little Mermaid with her red hair. I do like to have a go at the Colouring Heaven challenges whenever I can, so this month I wanted to try, even though mermaids are not something I really gravitate towards colouring. So I ran with that kind of challenge idea in my head to come up with my own variation on it. And what I thought was, maybe I could just use red. Maybe red would be the only colour that I use for the picture. And I thought, yeah, maybe I could get behind that. And then I thought again, well, maybe if I just use one red coloured pencil, that would make it interesting because I've done that a couple of times and quite enjoyed it. It's super quick and really fun. So I thought, yeah, maybe that would be something I could do. So today I'm going to be working on a picture from the newest Colouring Heaven, the Little Mermaid special, just using one red coloured pencil. This one here, this is Polychromos pencil, Deep Scarlet Red 219, I think that one is. So that's the coloured pencil I'm going to be using. And the picture we're going to be colouring is in a different issue, but I have brought this one out because there's a couple of examples in this one where I have just used the one coloured pencil to colour a whole page, and I thought I might show you a couple of examples before I actually went on to work onto the image we'll be using today. So this one is the Colouring Heaven Fairy Special. This is by Jana or Jana Prosverina, not entirely sure how to pronounce that. I think it's Jana, but yeah, this is the Fairy Special. And there's two pictures I've coloured in here, just using the one coloured pencil. And this is the first one, this little green fairy here. And this is the first one I actually ever did. There we go, get her into centre. This is the first one I ever did just using the one coloured pencil. And this was for a challenge on another Facebook group that I was belonging to at the time, to colour a picture just using one coloured pencil, an eraser and a blender pencil. So for this one I did actually bring in a blender pencil as well. I'm not entirely sure if I used an eraser or not, but if I did, it was allowed. And for this one, all I used to colour that one is the green. There's the green there from this pencil set, which is from the pound shop. Daleroni, yeah, Simply Colour colouring pencils, just the green from that one there. And I coloured this whole picture just with the one pencil. I think that worked out pretty well. I managed to get a few different textures going on there, kind of indicate the fur of the rabbit, the hair for the fairy. I added a few little dots and spots to the edges of her wings and a little bit of a bubbly texture in the background. I'm not sure, yeah, we can get that showing on the camera, a little bit of a bubbly kind of fairy magic effect going on in the background. But yeah, that one was all done with just the one green coloured pencil, the first time I ever tried it, and I did really enjoy that. So it's something I do go back to every now and then. I do have a couple more examples, but just with keeping this video short and stopping me rambling on too much, I thought I'd just show you this couple because they were both in the same magazine. And this is the other one that I would show you from here. And this one was done using the Ultramarine from the Arteza Expert Pencil Set. Although I do find that Arteza being pretty soft, for getting details it can be quite hard to keep your point, and I was sharpening quite a lot with that Arteza pencil, so yeah, I would prefer slightly harder pencils if I was going to be using this method, which is why I've gone to the Polychromos. I don't have many Polychromos, but thankfully I did have a red, so that's the one we're going to be using. But again, I did try for a few little different textures there by using different kinds of mark making, the little kind of hatching effects for the feathers there. I'm going slightly darker in to make these bands on the feathers. I've put a kind of texture there on the leaves, not entirely sure that is a leafy texture, but it was quite fun to do with a little bit of shading and then the spots on top. The kind of, again, the same method I used for the fur on the rabbit in the previous picture, for the kind of feathery effect on the owl here. And again, the lady's hair, and then darker pressure, lots of darker colour in the background there, trying to give an effect of a few little stars peeping through there. But again, yeah, that's another example of one that I've done just using the one coloured pencil, and I thought you guys might like to see or maybe give a few little tips, things I can think of to point out as I go along and maybe work on my mermaid for a little bit. So I'll just get this magazine out the way, just pop that off to the side for a minute. And as I said, the issue we're going to be working on today, this is the newest issue of Colouring Heaven that I have. This is the Little Mermaid Special Colouring Heaven by Fabiana Trere or Trere, not entirely sure how to pronounce that. But yeah, we're going to be working into this one here. And although the picture I have picked doesn't show the mermaid tail or anything along those lines, this is Ariel the Little Mermaid. And as you can see, I have started working here already with the red pencil. And I was quite enjoying that, getting quite into that, so I just stopped so that I could show you what I was doing. Actually do a little bit on film. I will zoom us in a minute, get a little bit closer, but again trying to get a few little different textures going there with the one coloured pencil. I've tried to make some sort of indication of a sort of bokeh bubbly effect in the background. Tried to give this coral a bit of a rough texture. Not sure if we're focusing. There we go. Tried to give this coral a little bit of a rough texture there. And again, the mermaid and the lady's hair. Made that quite dark with the kind of hair strokes going on there, but still all with the same pencil. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and work some more on this image. And this whole page is going to be coloured just with that one pencil, although I have kind of sort of already decided that I am going to add some red little stick-on crystals along this diagram on her forehead there. So that's kind of cheating a little bit from my own rules, but hey, they are my own rules, so I can bend them if I want to, right? Anyways, I'm going to zoom us in and I'll work a little bit more on this picture here, and you can see exactly how I go ahead with colouring a whole picture just with one pencil. So I'll move us in a little bit closer and we'll get started. Okay, so I've brought us in a little bit closer there so we can see a bit more of the detail. And what I thought was I could try and show you how I was getting this kind of effect for her hair, with all the hair strands and texture we've got going on. Maybe this effect I was using for the coral, how I was doing the background with this kind of bubble effect there. You can get quite a few different textures and effects just with one pencil by just varying your pressure, the amount of layers, things like that. And that is one of the reasons I did pick a Polychromos pencil. I don't have very many Polychromos pencils. I think I've only got 12, but there was a red among them, so that's the one that I've picked out. And yeah, Polychromos, I picked those because they are pretty hard pencils. They do hold the point, which is what you need when you're trying to draw hair or fiddly little textures like this coral here. And plus they do layer a lot, and you can see where I've only got 1 or 2 layers, really light layers for the skin there. The colour is really soft. And on her hair there, I have pressed quite hard and I've done quite a few layers, so we have some really intense colour there, which does look a lot darker. I've been leaving the white of the paper to come through for the highlights, and because also I'm trying to hold back from using my white gel pen, kind of for the challenge aspect, and also because when you use a white gel pen on top of a red pencil, it will seep through, the colour will seep through, and it will turn the white gel pen a kind of pinky colour, so it wouldn't be quite as effective. Maybe I'll start a little bit with her hair, I think. It's kind of a little hard to tell some places whether there's hair or there's background, but I'll dive in a little bit here. Maybe work on this kind of braid type area, if I can get into the middle there. Yeah, this kind of braid type area here. And start off fairly lightly with just doing the kind of hair strands to give a kind of background or base to the actual strand of hair, or chunk of hair rather. And we're trying to make this hair pretty dark. We want this to be a pretty vivid red, because as with most of my pictures, I do want the main focus to be on the character's face, possibly. There we go, getting a few little kind of strand lines going in there. And I want those to be fairly dark, so I'm pressing pretty hard and going over those strand lines quite a lot to really make those into that vivid red. Although for a lighter hair colour, yep, you could be a lot more delicate. But I thought it might be easier to show the difference between the darker hair with a lot more layers, a lot more pressure there. As you can see, we've really built up the colour there. And to show the shadow, very, very light area on the kind of ends of the strand of hair. As you can see, more shadow there on the end and on there, leaving the white highlights in this part where the light would actually be hitting it, where it's curving out and around there. So a tiny little bit of a lighter shading there. I think that gives a fairly convincing kind of hair texture just using the one pencil. And it can be done with any colour, as I've showed you earlier. That was with a green and a blue. And this one is red. I think I've also done one with brown, just with the random, I think that was a Crayola brown pencil. Although with Crayola you can't build up as many layers or get the kind of richness, the difference in the colours as we can get with a pencil like Polychromos. And again, yeah, putting in those strand lines. And because we're only using the one pencil, we don't need to think about colour palette, which kind of makes things a little less stressful, a little easier, I think. And we can just concentrate on maybe putting a few textures in and the difference between the light and the shade. The main thing is to remember is to leave that white paper coming through to be your highlight. Because as we only have the one colour here, the one pencil, leaving the white paper to come through and use that to our advantage means that we can get a little bit of a different shade or colour coming through without bringing in any extra actual pencils or Posca or white gel pen. And the light on this one, I think I've decided is coming from the right. So I'm trying to make my lightest areas of these hair strands be over towards the right. You can see there the shade more towards the left hand side of the actual picture. And whenever there is a shadow, I'm pressing pretty hard, trying to bring in a few different layers there to give that darker, brighter colour and give a contrast towards the white that we've got going on in these hair strands that are closer to us. This part in here, I'm not entirely sure if it's hair or if it's a background, but we'll colour it as hair. So we'll go in pretty dark here, because this area, if it was hair, would be way, way in the background. So to push it back, make it a bit less contrasty, we'll put in our hair strands, and then maybe cover the background with a very, very light layer of colour. I'm hoping that's showing up on the camera. But yeah, no bright white highlights on that bit. That is way, way back. We're keeping the bright white highlights for these parts that are closer to us and that we want to be more kind of shiny looking. Oh, I've just thought that fish up there would be fun to colour as flounder. I'm not sure if I'll be able to give the same kind of effect after looking up, see if I can give some sort of flounderness going on with that fish up there. I'm not much of a Disney girl, but I think flounder is yellow and blue, so his body would be lighter, his fins darker. Let's see if we can get that going on a little bit later. But yeah, that was how I was colouring her hair, bringing in the more pressure, heavier pressure, and the more layers for the darker areas, because we are concentrating on light and dark rather than different actual colours. I'm not entirely sure how dark we can actually go just with Polychromos. I think maybe we're at about the limit with this hair here as we're going. Again, it probably would have been a good idea to test out, see how dark I could get the kind of gradations of this colour going with the one pencil. See what exactly the different kind of shades of colour I could be getting. But in my normal tradition of playing around and jumping straight in, kind of figuring it out as we go. It is a fun little technique to do. It does make things fairly quick as you're not having to swap between pencils or anything like that. And the techniques are basically the same as if you are using the normal coloured, the normal range of coloured pencils that you would normally use. Just remembering to press harder, put more layers in your darker areas, and leave the white of the paper shine through. Could go on and colour this whole hair. I love colouring hair, but I don't want to bore you guys too much with it. Sorry, there may be a little bit of a cut there or a change of lighting. My ring lamp fell over and I've had to readjust everything. But anyways, as I was saying, that was how I was doing her hair. And we do have some coral here that we want to have kind of a bumpy sort of rough texture. We're not going for total realism, so just some indication of a kind of rough sort of bobbly texture I thought was working pretty well for the coral. There we are. See how I've done it on these little branches of coral here. And I've tried to make this kind of coral maybe a little bit of a mid-tone, not quite as dark as her hair, not quite as light as our little faint background we've got going on there. But there are quite a variety of tones you can get just from the pressure of the pencil, how hard you're pressing, or from how many layers that you're actually doing. The background is very, very light, one very, very light layer. And you can, even if you're thinking you're pressing a little bit too hard, your colour is getting a bit darker than you would want it to be, you can go in with the eraser. Yeah, never be worried to go in with the eraser. I did for this little area down here. When I first started colouring this picture, I was going in way too dark with my background and it was looking almost the same colour as the actual coral, so that wasn't quite working. So yeah, the eraser is a good tool to be using if you are only using the one pencil. But for the coral texture, I'll try on one of these kind of slightly larger pieces here. And because our light is coming from the right, then our shadow will be towards the left here. I do apologise for the neighbours, once again, banging the car doors. But I was adding in a light layer for a little bit of shadow along the left of the kind of coral stalks. Oh, again, not entirely sure of the terminology, but on the left side of these pieces of coral anyways. I was adding a little bit of shading behind any of these kind of cracks or kind of branch bits where you would normally shade if you were colouring with many coloured pencils. And then I was going in and trying to give this kind of dotty texture by adding in the little dots, just pressing quite hard and kind of making a little kind of circly motion with the pencil there to give a few of these little dots. Maybe even a few going over into the lighter side of the coral. And however many dots you want to put, however bobbly you want your coral to be, the more dots, the more bobbly your coral is going to be. And you can go in, once you've put in your dots, if you think you need a bit extra shading, we probably need a shadow under that strand of hair there. You can add in a little bit extra shading, actually over the top of the dots. And there we go, I told you, fairly quick and easy, just adding in a few little dots. So that's another of the little textures you can use if you are only using one pencil. This one is a fairly simple image to actually be trying with the one pencil. I didn't want to go way too complicated and too small for you guys to be able to see what I was doing. So there are mainly the textures of her hair, the coral, her skin once we get onto her face, and this little kind of sort of indication of bokeh effect I've got going on in the background there. But there are other different little textures you can bring in to kind of differentiate between different areas or bits of your picture, different elements. Get distracted going onto her hair there. You can do cross hatching. You can do a kind of a scribbly texture to indicate leaves. Any kind of texture or effect you do with your multiple pencils, you can, yeah, definitely bring into just using the one pencil. And instead of different colours, we are different shades. Getting a tiny bit small there to be able to show you, but yeah, I think I've kind of shown you there what the basic principle is. Just putting in mapping in the shadows where you think your shadows would go on the area that's furthest away from the light. As I've said, I've planned my light to be coming from the right, which is my usual go-to way to do my light. And then we're putting in these dots to give a bit of texture, and then adding in any more shading that we think we might need. Trying to keep the coral to a sort of mid-tone, as I said, to set it apart from her hair and from the rest of the background we've got going on. And the background, a fairly light tone. I might add in a little bit of shade. Beef it up a little bit to show that there's a shadow towards the left of this coral. I wasn't entirely sure if she was supposed to be underwater. I know she doesn't show it, she doesn't have her tail, but this is Ariel. This is the Little Mermaid. If you read the story, you'll see that the character is pretty much drawn the same. And there's a little bit of a story over on the other side of the page. There we have a little bit of a story, and as you read through the story, the character is drawn the same every time. So this is the Little Mermaid, despite any indications otherwise. This is our Ariel. The pencil is finally starting to get wear off the point. It's starting to get a little bit blunter now. Okay, moving on to the background to show how I was getting that little bubbly effect we have going on here. I think to get a little bit of space, I might have to move down towards this corner here. Maybe show you how I was doing that. And this is really quick and easy. Nothing fancy here. I'm not even using a stencil or anything for the circles. Those are all freehand. And as this coral is going to be sort of a mid-tone, the same sort of tone we've got going on here. I was keeping this background really fairly light, so hopefully this is actually showing up on the camera. And I was just putting in a few, very, very lightly sketching in a few kind of circles. And just shading around them. Just drawing in the circles kind of freehand. We do have a few little bubbles drawn in, sort of floating around here, but I thought maybe try and give some sort of effect that's kind of bokeh effect-ish. Obviously not a complete bokeh effect, though that would be interesting to try and do with just one pencil. But yeah, a few random kind of bubbles, a little bit of shading in between them. Trying to keep it fairly smooth with the circular sort of normal shading motions there. Maybe trying not to go too crazy with the bubbles. They are pretty fun to do though. I do love colouring in this kind of style with just the one pencil. It is pretty relaxing and it saves having to sort through all of your supplies looking for the perfect colours. Saves having a lot of materials kind of around you. You can just pick up one pencil and colour like this on the sofa, which is what I do like to do occasionally. And it is pretty effective. It does usually work really well. There we go. That's a good few kind of bubbles we've got going on there. Just keeping the shading really light around them like that. And maybe as I've done, you can see that over this side, a few kind of random bubbles sort of separated out from the rest. Maybe one here, keeping it fairly light. Just again freehand, maybe drawing in a couple of bubbles fairly randomly with a little bit of shading around them. So these little bubbles have separated from the rest of the background and just floated off on their own. Something like that. Of course, I am just quickly trying to show you guys you can spend as much time. You could even bring in your circle stencil if you wanted perfect circles, but I wasn't that bothered, so I just freehand drew in a few little circles like that. And if you think you are getting a little bit too heavy with your shading, you can very, very lightly bring in the eraser to make those bubbles really faint in the background there, and just add a little bit more darker shading around where the actual coral is coming. Would have been good to pick the Albert Dürer crimson pencil actually, so then for this water I could just splash on some water, spread that out and dilute it a bit to make a nice watery background. But yeah, those tend not to hold their point as well, I found. That one I've just made a little half circle to give a kind of suggestion there might be a bubble kind of forming down there. I'm trying to keep it fairly random. Something along those lines, as many bubbles or as little bubbles as you want. And that is the same kind of effect I used in the background of this fairy picture here, if I can get her onto camera. You can see just these little kind of bubbles floating around in the background, but in this case probably not exactly bubbles. Maybe more a kind of pollen maybe, or some sort of fairy magic effect. But yeah, you can see, yeah, I did bring in the kind of circly bokeh effect there on that picture. So it's not confined definitely to bubbles being under the sea or things like that. You can just use it as a bit of a bokeh background. It's quite fun to do and pretty effective in these kind of pictures where you are only using the one pencil. So moving on, I'll maybe start trying to shade her skin here. And I think the skin, we're going to be working with light layers. There is a little bit of shading, tiny little bit of grayscale if that's picking up on the camera, especially around the eyes and the lips. We have a little bit of grayscale going on there. And that does show you kind of where the shadows are supposed to be. So for our eye sockets, we'll go in the first very light layers of where the shading would come in. If I'm shading a face, usually I start with a kind of mid-tone to sort of put in where the shadows would come. I'm trying to be fairly tentative with this. It's been a while since I coloured a picture with one pencil, especially a face, so we want to give it a little indication of a chin there. Oops, a little bit of a scratch there with the pencil. And our light is coming from the right, so we don't want too much shading on this side of her face. We will have a shadow underneath the nose because that's where the grayscale is telling us. And most of our shading will go towards this side of her face. I'm trying super hard not to try and overthink it, as I'm very prone to overthink things, and just treat it as if I am just colouring my usual array of skin tone pencils. Just giving her the shape of her face, adding in a few more shadows on the side of her face because she is further away from what I'm thinking is the source of light over here. Just putting a shadow underneath her cheek there. She's fairly young, so we want to give her some nice kind of plump cheeks. Little dent above her lips. And for her lips, maybe we'll go in slightly darker with this red. They are marked out with the grayscale. So the red, in theory, hopefully, should look a little bit different from the red colour we've used for her hair, but we do want these to be, the lips to be slightly darker than her skin, for going for a natural kind of lip colour rather than makeup. I don't tend to draw makeup on my girls because I don't really wear it myself, to be perfectly honest, so yeah, I haven't got much of a clue. I really should maybe practice doing that. Maybe it could be one of my monthly themes. Makeup looks, because I do love to colour portraits, so that might fit quite well. Maybe. Tell me what you think in the comments. Should I practice doing makeup as a monthly theme? Might be interesting. I definitely need the practice. Okay, so we're making our lips pretty dark, but leaving some highlights, as I said, the white of the paper, although not as white as I would have liked. We do have a little bit of grayscale coming through there, so I could possibly bring in a white gel pen that would show up on the grayscale, but we are trying to limit that. Although I have adapted the contest rules, it is my own little rules, so why the heck not? So here we go, yeah, why not? And this is actually on top of the grayscale, so hopefully the red will not be bleeding through. But we will see. I'll leave that to the side because maybe I might bring that in for her eyes as well. But anyway, back to skin. I'm supposed to be colouring skin. I do tend to get distracted. I do love to colour faces, skin and hair, especially hair I do love. But we're going to want some shadow underneath where that hair comes in, although we're going to want to remember that we need the distinction between her hair and her skin, so Maybe fill in this little bit of hair here so I can see how dark that is actually going to be. I think I would probably do all of her hair before I went on to do her skin, or all of her skin before I went on to do her hair, either or. As I started with the hair, I would have done all her hair before I went on to her skin. So you can see how dark you can make the skin compared to the hair. We do want them to be two different colours so that it does look as if it's two different kind of elements of the picture. Because as was happening down with the coral, when I first started colouring this picture, the colours were getting too similar to each other. And it was a bit hard to tell which was the coral, which was the background. So you want to be able to keep the colours fairly different from each other. Just in terms of dark and light, because yeah, obviously it's the same colour pencil, the same colour technically, but we want the shade to be different, or tone. And for skin, we can use the white of the paper to come through as highlights again. Because Fabiana has set this Little Mermaid story in India, so the skin tones would be slightly darker. If we were taking that as our inspiration, the skin tone would be slightly darker. Although we do want to keep, as I said, a difference between our hair and our skin. We do want those to look different, so see how dark I can take it. We don't want the skin to be super light, but we don't want it to be as dark as the hair. So let's see how we can make that work. My blender pencils have actually run out at the moment, and I haven't got around to buying any more. So yeah, that would have helped slightly. Just think the same as if you're using your normal array of coloured pencils, with the first layer being your lightest colour, second layer being your next kind of darkest, and so on. I've just added in a little shadow there for that curl of hair. So our light would be coming from the right, maybe top right, because if she is under the sea, the sun would be coming from the top, so it would be top right. And that's how we figure out where the shadows would be. So yeah, definitely more down this side of her face. Maybe I should put in a little bit of hair there, so again I can see the contrast between the colours to know how dark I can actually take the skin. Just very quickly I've mapped in a couple of hair strands there, just pressing really hard to avoid having to go over many layers. I've just done one layer where I've pressed pretty hard, and I'd say that's about the same kind of tone as we want our hair to be. So yeah, we're not looking too bad. Trying to keep the shadows to the eye sockets and to the side of her nose here. Nose is always tricky. Even though we are on the lightest side of the face there, I think there still would be a bit of a shadow where the nose would actually come in. I think the underneath here, if our light is coming from the top, the underneath would be shadowy. And we do have a little bit of grayscale there as well, so yeah, the underneath would be shadowy, fairly dark. Just try and make that tip look slightly rounded. Oh yeah, that's working. Yeah, that is working. Stop messing with it, Elaine. Stop messing with it. It's working. I'm trying to leave a highlight along the edge of the face there, as I would if I was colouring any other picture. I'm not sure if it's interfering on the camera, but we do have the writing seems to be showing through the paper from the other side of the page, which is slightly annoying. But this newer Colouring Heaven paper is not as thick as the older one, so sometimes you do see the writing kind of shadowing through the page as you're colouring, which can be slightly annoying, but I think we can overlook it. That's not looking too bad. I think this is about the biggest face I've ever done, just using the one pencil. So this is quite good practice. I'm trying to shade the kind of roundness of her chin there without going super kind of harsh lines and making it look like she's got half a ping pong ball stuck on her chin. And under here we would be having a darker shadow, but not as dark as her hair again. Yeah, let's try bringing in bridge of a nose. So tempting to bring in the white to blend there. We can maybe make this shadow a little darker. Oops, yeah, gone a little bit crazy with that shading there. There we go. I'm trying to keep the darkest shadows to this far side of her face. The darkest shadows for her skin, that is. But still trying to keep it slightly lighter than her hair. Giving the same kind of shading to give the same kind of shape to her face over on the other side, but slightly lighter. We do have a little mark there for when our pencil scratched a little bit, so there we go. She gets beauty marks, yay! I do love popping those in. Maybe that shadow's starting to get a little bit too dark there, I think. But as long as we make sure our hair definitely looks separate from the skin, I think we're still working there. As always, as many layers or as few layers as you want, really. As with any colouring. And while I'm thinking about it, the pencil that I pick, if I'm going to be doing this, just colouring with the one pencil, a darker kind of colour pencil, I find is generally better than the lighter colours, like a really light pastel colour. I don't think if you picked a lighter colour like that, you wouldn't be able to get as much variation in your colours, because as you can see here, just putting light layers of this red and then going ahead and adding lots of layers, pressing harder, we do get a very good gradation in the colour. Whereas if you pick more of a pastel shade, a lighter shade, you can't really get that many different variations of the same colour. And some pencils don't layer as well. So yeah, you wouldn't be able to put as many layers of colour down, which also would kind of limit the amount of different shades you can have going on. So yeah, another little quick tip there that I found anyways. But if you guys have tried this and found anything different, then yeah, please let me know. But yeah, I have found that a darker kind of pencil, so you can lay some very, very light tones by like barely touching the pencil to the paper, is preferable than to have a really light colour where you have to really press down and get layers to get any kind of a darker colour going on. This red is a fairly good kind of mid-tone red, I think, so plus the fact that Polychromos will layer a lot, so I think it's working. Yeah, it seems to be working fairly well. I think the green that I did for my the fairy with the rabbit, that one was the least effective so far, I think, because the colour was fairly light. I did manage to get some variations going on, but yeah, I would have preferred a much darker green for that, I think. Tried shading her eyes just with a red. Give her red eyes, maybe she needs a nap. Okay, we'll try. This will be interesting. So the pupil, obviously in the middle there. We're trying to leave the highlight white, so I can go over that with the white gel pen and have that pupil. I don't think I'll be able to get away with shine lines because yeah, the red will soak through the white gel pen, and that wouldn't be as effective. I could try to do these the same way I would normally do eyes, but of course that would normally be with the greys for the shading, the black for the pupil. I'm trying to put in a few of these kind of lines, oops, slightly wrong angle, that I usually put in, going from the outside of the eye in towards the pupil, and leaving some kind of darker shading underneath the eyelid in both the main iris, the pupil, and the actual white of her eye. Some shade along where the eyelid folds over and towards the outer edges, because we're shading like a sphere, so the light would be here, everything else will gradually get darker towards the edges, so we try and shade the edges of the eyeballs like that. could maybe try the white gel pen. At least you'll see on camera what that would normally look like. And it will fade to pink, but that's to be expected, not entirely disappointing if that happens. And we do have our big highlight on the right because that's where the light's coming from. We'll try another smaller one. And the normal shine lines. Just in the spirit of keeping it as I would normally colour an eye, and I think that looks pretty good. It would look better if that pupil was actually black, but you can't have everything, eh? Yeah, I think that's working. I don't really want to push it too far. I was trying to make this skin slightly darker, but I don't want to go too crazy. As I said, maybe try putting in another layer of shading around this very edge here to show that that is furthest away from the light. Just get on and do her other eye while I'm thinking about it. There's her other eye. I'll just add in a tiny little bit of shadow, that crease under her eye there. That's working pretty well. I'm not sure I can push that skin very much further without losing the contrast with her hair, so I might leave that there. Not quite as dark as I would have liked to go with it. More of a medium skin tone than a dark, I would say that was, and light is definitely coming from that right there. So at least we've got that working. Yeah, we got a couple of beauty marks there. Yeah, a couple of beauty marks going now. I think that's about as far as I can push that skin before losing the contrast with the hair there, I think. But yeah, that does kind of actually show that you can get, just by layering, putting different layers of the red pencil down, just little soft layers, you can get quite a few different variations of colour there, like this darkest from around her eye here to this kind of medium here where the shadow for that curl of hair is coming, to the very light and this kind of tone here that maybe I could bring in a little bit more of, come to think of it. But that is showing that all the different shades of colour that you can get with the one pencil. But I'll add in a little bit more shadow under her chin there, keeping it darker in the middle, fading it off towards the edges because we don't want to lose that contrast with the hair. I think for this circle here, I'm just going to do the red kind of bindi dot. I think that's what it's called, pardon me if I'm getting that wrong, but yeah, little kind of red bindi dot. And I think that I'll bring in the crystals around here, so the crystals for these dots here, so for these ones, I'll maybe just make that the darker red as well. We'll try and make this look fairly like shiny metal by leaving some strong highlights. There we go, some sort of suggestion. A little kind of disc there, and I might, seeing as I've already used the white gel pen, why not bring it in for these little dots? So technically it's one pencil and a white gel pen and some stick-on crystals it'll probably be in the end. But yeah, the general principle for the picture was to give a few tips, kind of a little demonstration, maybe a little bit of inspiration to actually try colouring a picture with just one pencil. It's a fun kind of little experiment. So there we go, that's working pretty well. I think maybe while we're here on this subject, we'll try making this this fish. What do I say? A lighter body with the blue kind of darker fins. So we'll try and use the same kind of wobbly technique as I used for the coral, and try and adapt it to be sort of scales ish. I've no idea if I can get this to work. I don't colour many fish at all. I probably should be looking up a reference of flounder. I know he's not this shape at all. It's a completely different shaped fish. But my My recollection is telling me that he's yellow with blue fins, so I'm trying to make this fish. Let's try bringing in a kind of scribbly technique to maybe look like there's some sort of scale going on there. But we still want to leave him pretty shiny. So we'll leave a kind of a highlight line, shape of a line there, down his body. His fins are supposed to be darker than his body. I think I've gone a little bit too overboard there. We can still make these fins darker. That's not too bad, even if it doesn't look like flounder. It's a pretty little fish. There we go. That's pretty much working, I think. Keeping the kind of scale dots darker towards the belly of the fish and lightening up towards the top, because again the light would be coming from the right even on this little fishy, so we want him to be lighter towards the top there. So yeah, we've made him look pretty shiny there, I think, by using these little dots, the same kind of technique we used for doing the coral. And anything that we want to be shiny, we have to make sure there's pretty strong contrast between the dark and the light. So I think we've got that going on there. Same as with her hair, making her hair look pretty shiny, or anything that's metal. If we wanted this to be metal, we would try and bring in pretty strong contrast between the light and the dark. Because yeah, bringing in the white, there we go, something like that. Bringing in the white, it would soak through to the red. I've missed a little bit of shading there for her skin. But yeah, as I said, anything shiny, we want to make sure there's quite a lot of contrast between the light and the shade. It's quite hard to see what's going on in this crown actually, and it is fairly small, so we'll keep it fairly simple just by adding a pretty strong shadow there towards the bottom as our light's coming from the top, and making sure that we've got dark shadows around it. And we can kind of make sure that looks kind of like shiny metal. We don't want the outside here to be very dark because we are going to have a hair coming in there. And again, we want to have the contrast between the hair and any other parts of the picture. So each part of the picture needs to be looking as if it's separate. So we need to make sure there's still a difference between our colours there. Maybe we need to bring in the eraser. Yeah. Take those shadows back a bit. That's better. So those are the techniques that I would be using to finish off this picture. Using the bobbly effect for the coral, the same kind of effect we've used on this little fishy flounder here. The hair strands for her hair, trying to make that fairly deep and dark colour with the white highlights coming through from the paper instead of relying on the white gel pen, as I do like to do. For any of the metal or any of these teeny tiny little bits here, I'm trying to just bring in a few little kind of shadows, very basic, just to show there is something going on there, but not paying way too much attention to all the details here. Because our main focus is going to be her hair, her face, because that's where the most of the contrast is between the dark and the light. Because using contrast is a great way to grab attention, make something the focal point of a picture, and about the only way we've got of doing that if we're just using the one colour is using the light and the dark and the differences in tone. So that's what we've done around her face by using her hair being fairly dark, the white highlights in her hair contrasting with the dark kind of strands we've got going on. And we've got some dark colour going on with her eyes and her lips, so that should hopefully draw attention to her face once I've done. Everything else should be fairly well in the background. We're just needing maybe a little kind of suggestion that there's something there to make it look as if you haven't forgotten to colour it in. I have added in a few shadows here, trying to show that this jewellery is kind of 3D, so it does have a bit of a shadow going on there, and I've tried to keep that shadow to kind of a mid-tone, because there wasn't really a defining line between the mermaid skin and this background of all the coral here, so I'm just trying to fade it up from, have these bubbles kind of fading out, getting further up here towards her skin. So the shadows will be getting a tiny little bit deeper as we go up further towards where we have her skin blending into the actual background. But I won't go into too much detail, I don't think. It's the hair and the skin that I do enjoy colouring, so that's what I'm going to be concentrating on. I'm just filling in the background with a little bit of texture, a few bubbles in the background just to indicate that maybe she is under the water. And I think that will all work out quite well. And yeah, I probably will cheat and add a few little little stick-on crystals for a headpiece there. So I'll zoom us back out again now so we can see the whole picture and how she's starting to work out there. Okay, I've zoomed us out a little bit now so we can see the areas we were working on today and how they fit in to the picture as a whole. And those are the techniques I've showed you today that I will be going on to use to finish the whole picture. If I did manage to get the picture finished before the video is edited and actually up on YouTube, I will pop a scan of that image in here. And yeah, this is a pretty fun technique that I do like to use every now and then, just using the one pencil to try and colour a picture. It's a little bit of a challenge, but I think it does help you try and focus more on light and shadow rather than colour. You don't need to worry about colour if there's just one pencil. All you need to worry about is getting the different tones of the pencil with the darker colour, more layers, more pressure. It's a way to practice, especially for someone like me who doesn't go in for much layering. It's a way to practice layering and to practice with the pressure of your pencil, being able to get very, very light layers of colour laid down, which I do find quite difficult at times. I don't layer too much. I tend to go in with fairly heavy pressure and kind of blend colours together with the white more than anything. And I think colouring like this gives me more practice of actually being able to use layers more, which does take longer, but if you're only using one pencil, I think it's a fairly quick method of colouring. Because you're using the white of the paper as well, I think, rather than bringing in other colours, it does make it quite quick. Helps you to think about setting yourself a light source and thinking about where the actual light would be hitting your figure or your subject of your picture. Sometimes I think it takes a lot of the pressure off just to be able to think about where your light is coming from, where the shadows would be, and just concentrate on that rather than trying to think about colour palettes or what kind of pencils to use. I did end up bringing in the white gel pen. I didn't think I'd be able to stay away from that, to be honest. It does tend to bleed through if you use it on top of the red, so it will go a slightly pinky colour, which is still lighter than the colour you're using it on top of. So yeah, it's not a bad thing to be using the white gel pen, even if you are thinking of only using the one pencil. Definitely think about using an eraser. I have on a fair few occasions during this picture. And a blender pencil would indeed have been useful, especially on his skin. I was so tempted to bring in the white Polychromos or the Arteza pencil just to try and blend in those kind of edges. But again, that is something to practice, not being able to blend and just working with the layers and trying to get a smooth lay down that way. So yeah, for me, a lot of good practice there. Hopefully you've enjoyed tagging along today and seeing the different ways that I colour using one coloured pencil to colour a whole picture. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Take care everyone, and I'll see you in future videos. Bye!